Come, Lord, minister directly to our hearts on this day of retreat. Speak a word to us, open our soul to pick up what you are trying to prompt in our hearts. Minister to us and give us a listening ear. As we open your word now and hear what you are inspiring in these thoughts of grace. For look, says the Lord to the prophet Malachi, the day is coming, growing like a furnace. All the proud and all the evildoers will be the stubble. And the day when it comes will set them ablaze, says the Lord of hosts, leaving them neither root nor branch. But for you who fear my name, the Sun of Justice will rise with healing in his rays. The host is raining upon us, and from it there are rays of warmth and grace. And the only attitude of the soul before it is that of complete absence of self and therefore pride. Adoration is an expression of inner surrender. All else that we do in the worship of our God must be but the outworking of that, and it must not start from that end. Indeed, it can be counterproductive if all the attention is given to that end. After a while, what we do in the liturgical field becomes, as it were, second nature, and that is how it should be, so that we're free to fly. The old problem of what we used to call ritualism is the illness of concentrating on the wrong thing. Having said that, we have an inheritance, and that we must respect. And the humility that comes in adoration extends itself also to that. But we don't think we have more knowledge than those who went before us. One stands in awe at the way that previous generations have approached their God. One of the great illnesses of our day in the liturgical field is a subtle form of pride. That man has become too important. He has become too visible. When we are before the presence, we realize, like Moses, that we're on holy ground, and all we can do is humbly, on all levels, bow before what is greater than ourselves. In this monastery, a lot of things have been maintained or even actually restored, and the way in which the sisters prostrate themselves every day before that presence as victims is a sign that they've understood correctly also on that level the surrender of the soul. We recall how at Fatima, before Our Lady came, there was already in 1916 a series of angelic interventions. And we recall how these little children were taught to adore with their foreheads touching the ground. And they were taught also this element of the link between adoration and reparation. For they were to make reparation for those moments where adoration was absent and its contrary was coming in, or the sacrilegious outrages and indifference by which the Most Holy Trinity was offended. And that is ever more present. Indeed, when the series of apparitions at Fatima was coming to an end, in one of the last strange scenes that they saw, Our Lady appeared as Mount Carmel, that is, Our Lady of Mount Carmel wearing that scapular, and also dropped a little hint that she would return as Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And a few people have noticed that when at Garabandal it was reported that she was coming back, she was dressed as Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And so we need to also respect this. For what happened at Garabandal, it seems, was linked with the Blessed Sacrament. The Archangel was involved, and there was a great sadness in heaven because the Lord was being given less respect, less honor in the Blessed Sacrament. And in the early 60s, in the country, in Spain, they could not understand how that could be. Indeed, it is reported that when those children were in ecstasy, in the initial stages they were able to actually go into church itself while still in ecstasy. But one thing they noticed is that when they were going away from the tabernacle, they were physically unable to turn their back on it. They would always walk backwards. And that discipline actually is still slightly there. We do not easily turn our back on the Blessed Sacrament in the liturgical mode. When it is exposed, it is well still to walk backwards, that is right before it, rather than turn one's back. I remember talking to Sisters of Adoration in Italy, and they too had been taught that one doesn't walk backwards before the Blessed Sacrament exposed. With regard to one element, it is the fact that we have a link between adoration and silence, as we have the inverse link between pride and noise. When we are noisy in the presence, noisy either just by talking or by talking a lot and loudly about things that do not pertain to God in the liturgical sphere, when celebrating, making people laugh and so on, and drawing applause, we are participating in that sin of pride indirectly, for we are raining upon the silent one, crowding him out and filling the presence with another presence, which is human. There is a direct link between the interior life and silence. This day, the Feast of St. Martin, is a day when something actually was dramatically silent years ago. One recalls that at the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month, there was silence in the trenches. The guns stopped. Until then, except for the strange, spontaneous truce at the first Christmas, there had been unending, infernal noise of killing. A participation, unfortunately, in what we can imagine to be going on in hell. Unending noise. What happened in those trenches is unimaginable. But there were also spectacular exceptions. Holiness. Also chaplains being protected miraculously, bullets going around them, so that they could minister to the dying troops, who at that point actually knew what was in the balance. I heard this testimony one time, that at Dunkirk, later in time, there were no atheists. perhaps many were saved in those trenches that perhaps could have been lost if they were allowed to live. Death certainly makes one sober and a little humble. A greater power, eternity, stands before one and will not spare. But St. Martin also has other connotations. The saint of charity. Christ appeared because he was well treated by this Martin in the figure of the beggar, a reminder unto us that we have a presence there also to honour. The brother next to us, another form of the divine presence, and we're judged also on him, how we handle him. But I'd like to pause for a moment on one thing which is linked with this. It's a testimony with regard to this question of the interior life and what is its protection and its normal modality. For years I was enclosed at the by now long since closed Chartreuse of Célignac in the Val Saint-Martin, but it was the Chartreuse de Saint-Martin, and the feast of the 11th of November was solemnity. It was our home feast. But I want to zoom into one particular character. It's Dom Martin. Dom Martin, Sourdat, was prior, but he had asked to be released from that responsibility. I had only known him at a distance, because by then he had been allowed to step down and go to the Carthusian nuns as their chaplain at Nonac, which is not closed, that's still open. Well, I heard from the president, while he was still alive, that he was somewhat special. I remember Don Augustin saying one time, "C'est un saint non canonisé, mais tout à fait muet." An uncanonized saint, but completely mute. Hence, they allowed him to step down from being prior. He didn't talk. He only talked when he really had to. And of course, in the Carthusian life, that can create a few problems. But they knew that he was different. Apparently, when he went up to the altar to celebrate, you could tell that he was going into a different mode, a different realm. That he was somehow with the angels, and there was an expression on his face which was quite angelic, which wasn't fabricated. Something was going on. He entered very young, which in those days was still possible. He was with my novice master, who was a holy man himself, who had entered in 1936 and was already a priest. He was only 67 when this happened, Dom Martin, by then chaplain with the nuns. One day, the prioress found that he hadn't taken his food from the guichet. She went in and she found this. It was a note. "I know that the Lord is coming for me." He wasn't ill, but somehow he knew that the Lord was coming that day for him. And he wanted to leave this word for the sisters and for us. Simply, le secret de la vie intérieure, c'est le saint silence. And that word resonated in the silence of the cell, because I realized that actually that is a profound spiritual truth. It is also a psychological truth. For I noticed that when it came to the weekly confession, proportionately, a lot of the examination of conscience would go into just one moment, what happened on the weekly walk. And so it is that in a life without word, without leakage, the soul is completely channeled in one sole direction. For leakage is when we actually dissipate the energy of the soul in diverse channels. And each idle word is in some way a dissipation. The Lord Himself actually warns us of that in Matthew chapter 12, verse 36. That we will have to answer for every idle word. So perhaps as we enter quietly into this quiet place where the Sun of Justice reigns upon the altar, upon the cloister and upon the world, we too can recall this quiet word and take it with us, that the interior life has its inbuilt rules, and that silence and humility